Welcome to the 12th conference's panel session right now. The panel's title is The End of Uncertainty in Public Policies and the New Business Normal. As you know, in 2015, the world has entered a completely new era with the acceptance of this new development goals. And then after the signature of the Paris Agreement, we have two very important goals ahead of us. One of them is Fit for 55, and until 2030, all emissions will be decreased by 50 to 55%. The other one is the 2050 zero emission goal that we all are familiar with. Now, after these goals, as you know, the European Union has started the Green Compact, and then and although we're going to speak about the end of uncertainty in public policies in our panel, actually we will be talking about the beginning of uncertainty, because the governments, institutions, private sector, public sector, I mean, all of these institutions are now facing this problem about how they're going to reach these goals, because many believe that these goals will not be able to be reached. But of course, there are some who are still optimistic. But even European Union thinks that this is not realistic. That's why they actually initiated a new practice, and they said in 100% renewable energy will not be available in 2050, but nuclear will be supporting during this transition period to the 100% renewable energy. So we have a huge uncertainty ahead of us. This uncertainty are especially more critical in countries like Turkey, because yes, we did have a zero carbon emission goal in Turkey, but how are we going to reach this goal? How are we going to decrease gradually the fossil fuel usage? What will be the regulation that will be enacted by the government? These are all still question marks. And we have two very important panelists, one from Turkey, one from abroad. One of them is from a banking sector, one of them is an industrialist, the other one is one of the global executives of the CDP. So I would like to start with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Harry Boyd Carpenter. He is from EBRD. He is a high-level executive about green economy, and he graduated from Oxford University, started working in EBRD. He assumed many different positions, many different roles. Then in 2021, in April, he assumed a new position where he will be responsible. He is the manager, the director of green economy, and he is actually responsible for the coordination of all green related activities of EBRD, and also he is responsible that some part of the funding should be the green funding that is given by the EBRD. So all speakers will have 15 minutes. We're going to have two tours. So every tour we're going to give you 5 to 7 minutes. So do you think that it will be possible to reach these goals? That will be your question for the first tour. And the second tour, please talk about what your institutions are actually doing to reach these goals. Yes, Harry, the floor is yours, please.
So thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this conference. It's a great honor. I'll perhaps say a few words just about EBRD. I hope that many of your attendees know who we are, but for those who don't, we're an international development, multilateral development bank. Despite the name, we're extremely active in regions well beyond Europe. We stretch from Morocco to Mongolia, but our sort of heartland remains Central and Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Turkey, and Central Asia, North Africa. For us, climate change and the green economy are absolutely fundamental goals. We have a commitment that by 2025, more than 50% of our investments should be in the green sphere. We managed to achieve that goal last year, and so now we're looking to build on that and to do more and more and more. It's not just about investment, though. It's also about trying to help our countries of operation rewire their economies, change the regulatory framework that govern the way their economies work and the way investors are active in their economies, in order to be able to deliver a climate friendly, a climate resilient, and a low carbon economy. Turkey is consistently one of our largest countries of operation, if not the largest, and well over half of our investments in Turkey are typically green investments. And that can be everything from supporting renewable energy to supporting industrial companies trying to green their production, to supporting municipalities. Very recently, for example, we helped the city of Gaziantep. We signed a loan with the city of Gaziantep to replace many of its buses with electric buses. If I turn to your first question was, is it realistic? I hope so, is my answer. I think if it isn't, if we don't achieve a very fundamental transformation in our economies, it is clear that we are going to have really serious problems across all sorts of spheres. There's a very famous Italian novel, The Leopard, which has this often quoted phrase that says, if we want things to stay the same, then everything must change. And I think that's very appropriate for climate change. If we want to keep the quality of life that certainly Europe has developed in the last century, and that many other countries are reaching and have a right to, if we want to have that quality of life, then we have to change the whole way in which our economies operate. And we have to change the way, above all, in which we fuel our economies. I think what is clear is that getting to 2030 is entirely realistic. If you look at the fundamental numbers and say, what do we need to do? We need to reduce emissions to 0 by 2050, and we need to halve those emissions by 2030. Getting to 0 is extremely challenging. And it's clear that the last part of that road is very, very difficult. And in fact, we probably don't have now the technologies to get to 0. But what is also clear is that we do have the technologies to get to reduce emissions by half by 2030. And I think, so my answer is, I don't know if it's realistic to get to 0 by 2050, but I do know that it's realistic to halve emissions by 2030. And therefore, I think we can really focus on that. And in a way, almost not worry about the last stage. I like to climb mountains, and I often say, I went to climb some mountains last week with my children, and of course, like all children, they complain and they say, how much further is it, and when will we get to the top? And my answer is always, don't think about the top, just take the next step and the next step. And I think sometimes climate change is a little bit like that. Let's focus on what we can do tomorrow, the next year, the next 5 years. Let's focus on that 2030 goal, and then we'll worry about the 0 when we get a little bit closer to 2050. And if I just finish by expanding on that theme a little bit, because of the theme of this conference is about disclosure and it's about corporate governance. I think what is also clear is that even if you don't know whether or not getting to 0 is realistic, even if you don't know exactly what the shape is, there are some things you really can know. You can know that it always makes sense to be transparent about your risks, transparent internally in terms of thinking through your risks, and transparent externally in terms of disclosing to your investors and your stakeholders your risks and your exposure to those risks. So it always makes sense to disclose those risks, and it always makes sense to govern them well, which means to have processes in place to assess those risks, to manage them and mitigate them. And that's one of the things I think we keep coming back to in these discussions, which is a lot of things we can do to address a climate emergency just make sense. They make sense in all scenarios. They make sense for lots of reasons that are not to do with climate. So I do think that's why a conference like this is so important. The work of the CDP is so important. And let's start with some basics. We know that we can disclose risks, so let's disclose them. We know that we can manage those risks or have governance processes in place to assess those risks, so let's do that. And then we also know that there are an awful lot of things we can do right now to reduce energy consumption, to decarbonize energy consumption. So let's just take those risks. take those steps, do those things, and let's worry about the zero when we get a bit closer to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. Either you're optimistic or you're pessimistic, I don't know, but you're definitely very realistic. I really liked your approach very much. I mean, instead of thinking about the peak, the summit, you have to think about your next steps. It's so true. Now I'd like to give the floor to Sonia. She is the global head of value chains and regional director corporations at CDP. She has over 17 years of environmental experience, both in the public and private sector. Over the last few years, she has specialized especially on scope 3. Sonia, I'm asking the same question to you. Is it realistic or not?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for having me on such a distinguished panel. Do I think it's possible to achieve these goals? I think we can, but not only do I think we can, I think we must. Just to reiterate what Harry said, the other option is almost unthinkable. Paul Dickinson, the chair of CDP, touched on that earlier. The fallout of us not meeting these goals, the impact on our children in the future, requires us to meet these goals. And I think that human resilience and ingenuity will rise to the occasion. However, it's going to require collaboration on a scale which is potentially unprecedented. Geographical borders, political borders, they mean nothing to climate change. The impacts will be felt globally, and therefore the responsibility must be tackled globally. What does this mean for a company? I've been working with companies looking at climate change, I think, as you mentioned, for in excess of 15 years, and it's probably coming up to 2 decades. I don't like to count anymore. But here are a few things that I've learned or seen. The scale of pace since the Paris Agreement has been phenomenal. The level of corporate engagement, the movement towards setting targets in line with science. We're at 1,000 companies globally, but there is a pipeline behind that that's astronomical. There is a lot of these 1,000 companies have committed to cascading science-based targets down their value chain. So we're seeing the level of ambition from the companies, rising up to meet that the governments have issued. What we're also seeing, particularly, is these companies are using their influence to drive further action outside of their operational boundaries. Many of the speakers have touched on value chain. It happens to be a point of my expertise. I won't labor it. But as Gonzalo mentioned, one thing we're seeing more frequently is value chain emissions, scope 3. And we're seeing the role of companies in being able to drive action beyond their borders by engaging with their global supply chain as being one of the key levers that needs to be pulled in the next few years to get us to the halfway point that Harry mentioned, but also to get us beyond to that net zero. And I was delighted to see that Turkey had 8 companies receiving a score of the supplier engagement rating. Again, that level of collaboration, engaging with your suppliers, taking responsibility for emissions outside of your control, shows the level of collaboration that's needed across all parties, governments, corporations, even individual actors. That's the kind of level of collaboration that we need to achieve it. And I'm optimistic because I think that more people are coming to the table. And when they do, and as they do, and that cascade happens, there'll be a tipping point And hopefully at that tipping point, we'll see more companies get involved. I'm going to level off that optimism with a quick example of realism to go alongside it. As I mentioned, I work with many companies, and the fact of the matter is the level of recognition of climate change is still not there at a global level. I worked with one consumer goods company based in the US who asked some of their biggest suppliers to disclose to CDP, disclose their greenhouse gas emissions to CDP. They received a reply from one of their suppliers, who is not a small to medium enterprise, a pretty sizable company, that said, "Thank you very much for the invitation to partake in CDP, but I don't think this is meant for us. We don't own any greenhouses." So the level to achieve these goals is possible, but the level of collaboration, commitment, and education needs to rise in the next year. I'll stop there. I hope that answers the question, or at least gives an inkling to it.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Yes, as you said, I mean, we know the awareness is so low. We need education, and that's why CDP and other NGOs have to actually work more on raising awareness. So our next speaker is from Turkey, from finance sector. He is the sustainable finance executive in Guarantee Bank. She has more than 8 years hands-on experience in project and structured finance. She graduated from economics from Boğaziçi University. She also leads the sustainability team of the bank. Yes, Saray, welcome. Let's hear about your opinion. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. In Turkey, once the Paris Agreement was ratified by the parliament, the lawmakers, the business world, and the local administrators had to take certain actions. And before that, actually, in 2021, the green project of Turkey was also announced. I mean, there were many important steps taken by the Turkish government. 2020, 2021 were actually very important years where we have seen very concrete steps taken. And of course, once the Paris Agreement was ratified by the parliament, then this pace has accelerated. And we did the GOP 2026 conference. We organized the GOP 2026 conference, and we also announced our goals for the emissions. So for the Paris Agreement to be valid in Turkey is, of course, very much tied to funding processes. So now we are talking about the green revolution, and the president has actually announced a 3.2 billion TL worth of grants given to green projects. And of course, to reach these funding packages and the conditions of these packages, definitely
it actually requires a more ambitious climate program on the side of Turkey. So in line with the 2053 net zero goal, Turkey should create a national contribution statement and come up with the investment plans to enable this transition. And in February, as a bank, we were involved in the Green Financing and Carbon Pricing Commission. We were part of that. And also we witnessed this important climate meeting. As for the results of this meeting, it will be an input for the climate law. So the 2053 net zero when we think of that, these are important steps. And the results of this meeting are not officially announced yet, but when we look at the decisions on the financing side, the 2053 net zero emission goal, so there will be this national green strategy, and there will be incentives and supports for green transition. So the general principles, criteria, and conditions for this will be established, and the green financing tools, and whether they're in line with international standards, there is need for the regulation base. So there are very critical decisions around that. This is not only important for public financing, but also for private financing in combating climate crisis. So it will not leave anybody behind. In terms of sustainable development, these are very important developments. Well, the details are not clear yet, but it is started as a green development revolution. And it's of course great to see the tangible steps that are taken. But this is an issue that threatens the future. Is it enough? No, we need more efficient, faster decisions. And we can only reach those goals if we take stronger steps. Every day we see new disasters in our country, floods, wildfires, etc. And of course, it will have a very huge financial cost at the end, a financial burden. As Garanti BBVA, we have been going on for 15 years. It's not just the finance sector, but we are going to give support for the green transition of all sectors. We're going to continue with this process, and we hope that these green financing actions will be implemented as soon as possible by the other, decision makers. Thank you very much. Garanti BBVA is doing great work in terms of green financing in Turkey. We hope that your activities will increase further. So I would like to give the floor to the last speaker. The last speaker is from the industry, Mr. Cevdet Alemdar. He's from Boğaziçi University, and then he has an MS degree from Sabancı University as well. And he had an MBA at Sabancı University. He couldn't get away from that university. In 1993, he entered Sabancı Holding, Banksa, Kortsa, Temsa, Filisa. So he worked in all of these Sabancı companies in different positions. And he is also a member of TÜSİAD, Turkish Business People Association. He continues his activities there as well. Welcome, Mr. Alemdar. So from the perspective of the industry, what would you say about those climate targets in Turkey and in the world? Thank you very much for giving me the floor. First of all, I am representing the Turkish Business People Association here today. When it comes to environment, climate change, and energy, we have the TÜSİAD Roundtable, and I'm representing that roundtable. And I'm among experts here, so I'll cut short. I know that this is a very important issue, and TÜSİAD has always been a pioneer in this area. From the very beginning, before Turkey ratified Paris Agreement, TÜSİAD supported this agreement, made announcements in that regard. So I have a couple of highlights. We have this TÜSİAD report titled Building the Future. So I would like to highlight a few points there. How important is this issue in Turkey? As for the excessive climate events, in 2022, there were 140 events. And in 2020, it's 984. So we have 3 excessive climate events in Turkey every single day. And unfortunately, this is just the beginning. When we look at the scorecard of Turkey, it's not too bad, but it's not too good either. For instance, let's take energy efficiency. We're quite poor there. Among OECD countries, we're ranking almost the last. Another negative issue is this greenhouse emission. In Turkey, from 2005 to 2016, there was a serious increase there, and compared to the rest of the OECD region. But there are some good aspects too. For instance, renewable energy sources. it's about 50% based on the energy data for 2020. As for the renewable energy capacity, it's higher than Europe's today. And on the other hand, plastic recycling. In Turkey, there's about 3 million tons of plastic waste recycling. And 33% of this 1.1 million ton can be recovered. This is good. So this is positive. As for the renewable energy issue, there's one more thing. I said we're good on that side. When it comes to wind energy, we only use 20% of that today. As for solar energy, we only use 7% of that today. So we have a lot more distance to cover. We have a lot of opportunity there. And well, yes, we're here among experts. So beyond how important this topic is, I want to say a few other issues. There are 5 concepts. There are steps that both the public and the private sector needs to take in Turkey. There are 5 important concepts. One is digitization and green transit. We think that digitalization and green transition are hand in hand. You cannot separate them from each other. I was in COP26. I listened to Al Gore. I had the chance to speak to him. So measurement is very important. It's very important for realizing green transition. So digitalization is very important. Digitalization and green transition are inseparable from one another. And of course, the technological transformation is very important for that. And also in the value chain, you need green transition throughout the value chain. And when we talk about following that transition, again, it's about digitalization. So that's the first concept, digitalization. I also would like to talk about energy efficiency. We're not doing well there. In the Turkish business world, in the production processes, resource and energy efficiency require modernization, alternative raw material use, carbon storage technologies, measurement systems, investment. So we see that this agenda is on the rise, and it has to be the case. There are ESG criteria mechanisms, having finance resources, access to finance resources. So this is very important in that regard. And the second important concept that I'd like to talk about is taxonomy. What is green? What is not? What is sustainable? What is not? There is the European Union taxonomy. So in Turkey, this has to be clarified as soon as possible so that we know what we're talking about. I mean, otherwise there will be container concepts. Everything is loaded on sustainability. That is wrong. We have to talk about taxonomy. We have to be speaking the same language scientifically. The third concept, we always talk about Paris Agreement, 2053 targets. The main issue there is the carbon adjustment mechanism at the border. And in order to reduce the emission, there is this emission trade system. This is established in Europe and it is announced. But in Turkey, this has to be clarified in line with Europe. This is critically important because one of our largest export markets is Europe. We're not doing bad there. However, we should immediately take measures and clarify that point in Turkey. So this will open the ways for financing for us as well. There is one point that I'd like to make. So this carbon adjustment at the border tax, we shouldn't just see this as a relation in terms of our relationship with Europe alone. Europe has the self-protection mechanism from carbon leakage. They just have this as a protection mechanism. I'm among experts, so I'm not going to explain in detail what carbon leakage is, but there is this emission trade system. So we should bring this to Turkey immediately. Otherwise, this carbon leakage mechanism, we're going to be affected by that in Turkey. It will actually be risky for the transformation of our industry and our economy. The fifth concept and the final concept is as follows. I talked about emission trade system. I said we should bring carbon adjustment at the border. So we are creating a fund there. Where is this fund going to be used? In TUSIAD, we think that this fund should be transferred to green transition projects, not anywhere else. It shouldn't be transferred to anywhere else, but green transition projects. So these are the 5 main concepts that are important for us. Digitalization and green transition are inseparable. That's number 1. Second, energy efficiency is very, very, very important, and it needs to be clarified. So together with technology, the incentives, the support needs to be clarified. Third, taxonomy is very important. We should be speaking the same language, to be clear. Number 4, carbon adjustment at the border and ETS, they need to be related to each other. And Turkey, together with ETS, it should just bring it at the same time. And 5th, we have created funds. We should use them for green transition. This is a perspective of TUSIAD. Green transition, is a huge opportunity, not just a risk. Thank you. Thank you very much, Cevdet Bey. We totally agree with these 5 topics. I want to add a 6th one, especially when it comes to technology, local R&D and know-how. This definitely needs to increase. So we should have less expensive local production. So I think this is an important 6th concept. So in the first round, we have heard great remarks. We'll continue with the second tour. I'll go back to Harry. In the second tour, I want to ask the speakers, in order to get rid of this ambiguity, what needs to be done? So what do your institutions do about these? What are your suggestions for solutions? Yes, Harry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I think, what can an institution like EBRD do? There's 2 things we do. One is we provide finance for green investments. And we provide that across the spectrum. So we support Turkish banks by lending to them on the basis that they will then on-lend for green projects. And that allows us to reach, parts of the economy that we don't have the resources to service otherwise. We also work with municipalities. I mentioned before Gaziantep. We also work with Izmir and with Istanbul. And then we obviously work with many Turkish companies, and one of the great strengths of the Turkish economy is just one after another phenomenal companies who are really at the forefront, not just in Turkey but globally, in terms of adapting to this new world, in terms of preparing for these new risks. So we provide finance, but in a way that's what you'd expect me to say, because we have bank in our name. And if we didn't lend, and we wouldn't be a very good bank. The other important thing that we do, and other multilateral actors like us do, is that we try to provide support in designing your roadmap for this new world. And if you go back to the fundamentals of what's changing here, we're moving from an economy globally, which is 80% or something like 80% reliant on high carbon energy sources, to one that is 0% reliant in 30 years. And, we talked earlier about whether or not it's realistic or not, but it's, even if it isn't going to go to 0, it's going to go very, very low. And that is a huge transformation. We've never seen a transformation like that in economic history. So you need a plan and you need a map for that pathway. And so what we try to do is we try to help companies and municipalities and governments with designing that map or writing that map. Now, obviously, Turkey is a very big country, very big government, very big economy. It doesn't need our help in a lot of different places, but we will help, where we have something particular to offer. So we've provided inputs into the design of a renewable energy program. We've provided we're working now on a low carbon pathway for the steel sector. We have some discussions about some other industrial sectors. And I think going to the substance of your question, which is, what do you need in order to reduce uncertainty? You need the right regulatory framework. And there are many elements to that, but I'll just mention a couple of really key ones. Number one is a carbon price of some sort. What's very clear is that the most efficient, most effective way to drive decarbonisation, and incidentally to reward the companies that are most effective and most advanced in decarbonization is to have a carbon price. So we're very interested, very excited to see how the Turkish government is going to develop the proposed emissions trading scheme. We think that will be hugely important for Turkey. So I think that's the number one thing. You need a carbon price in some form or other. Earlier speakers mentioned the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The carbon price is also vital in terms of preserving export competitiveness. You know, if you want, especially in dealing with Europe, but I think also, frankly, across the world, this is going to come. If you want to be a globally competitive economy, it will be increasingly important to price carbon. So carbon price is really important. And then beyond that, you need the sort of sector regulation that really shows business, here's the long-term plan. Here's where we want our country to go. I mentioned the work we're doing on the steel sector, the work, obviously, the Turkish government is developing its new energy strategy. That's going to be hugely important. But really, everywhere you look, you know, whether it's mobility, you know, the shift to electric vehicles, whether it's a low carbon plan for the finance sector and requirements to disclose and talk about a taxonomy, you need that plan. So I think that's my basic answer to your question, is that you need regulation, and you need it in two forms. You need an economy-wide carbon price, and then you need sector by sector roadmaps that set the course and say, here's where we're going to go, here's the plan for 5 years, here's the plan for 10 years, and here's the long term.
Thank you very much, Harry. You gave great information. I believe you have to leave, right? Thank you very much for your participation.
I certainly have a few more minutes, and it's a very interesting conversation, so I'll stay as long as I can.
Okay, great. So listen to Sonia a little bit then. Sonia, I have the same question for you. As CDP, what contributions do you make in order to eliminate this ambiguity in the world? What needs to be done? Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to answer because I very much enjoyed a tick list of 4. In our first 2 decades, CDP focused on raising ambition around climate, water, and forests, and providing data to improve governance and decision making. There is now an urgent need to ensure stated intentions are accompanied by concrete plans with transition metrics and evidence of progress against the agreed goals. Climate change is a long-term game, but we cannot wait to 2030, 2040, 2050 to see if we're on track. We've got to be taking the numbers and taking stock year on year to make sure that we are on track. So to that matter, we're going to be working on 4 different areas. We've talked a lot about governments. CDP do work with governments globally. I don't know if you all know this, but if you disclose to CDP publicly, the targets that you set around climate change automatically get fed into what is known as a NASCA platform. This is a platform available via the UNFCCC to all policymakers, so they can see the levels of targets being set by companies, the number of targets, but also the ambition level. And I think in an interesting way, that gives you a really powerful position. We're talking about the end of uncertainty around regulation, and the moderator quite accurately put it. The uncertainty is very much there, but it's the end of ambivalence. Regulation and increased regulation is virtually a certainty on a global scale now. And businesses have a role in shaping that by setting bold commitments, by setting science-based targets, by engaging actively with governments. You will set the tone that they feel empowered to really put those things into position. They need to hear positives around carbon pricing, around that proposition. And by you as leaders engaging on that, you will be facilitating better global regulation. And we've seen that very much come to fruition in the USA. I won't go into details, but recently the SEC has launched an ambition to set mandatory disclosure. It references CDP X amount of times, and the businesses that we work with in the US were very proactive in stating how positive they were to see that happen. So engaging governments. The second thing that CDP will be doing is working with more influencers. We will increase the amount of stakeholders. I think most of you know that we work with hundreds of investors on a global basis. We work with 680 investors who represent $130 trillion in assets under management. What some of you may know is that we work with purchasers as well. Last year, we worked with over 200 major buyers who represented $5.5 trillion of purchasing power. The numbers are still being finalized, but we're looking at over 270 major buyers this year, and they're coming up to $7 trillion worth of purchasing power. We're also starting to work with more lenders alongside the investors. So you'll see a wider, as you work with CDP, you'll see a wider spectrum of stakeholders that we're bringing into this movement, this environmental disclosure movement, as that will tick up year on year. We will continue to push for more climate-aligned goals, science-based targets. We're seeing investors actually push us a little bit more on strengthening that position within CDP scoring, but also in the way that they are now actively writing out to some of the biggest companies in the world, asking them to set science-based targets. That number of investors working with us and that emphasis on science-based targets, I think, will increase. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, someone has to be the accountant in this. And the CDP loves data. Those of you who've worked with us for years, we very much see our role in tracking the transition and lending transparency to is what we're seeing reported by companies on track with what the UNFCCC is hoping to see. We know from experience that the NDCs still aren't adding up. The global government commitments still haven't added up to what we need to avert this disastrous future. There is a hope that maybe the companies can sort of fill the void. That was the nature of Race to Zero. So we're going to be tracking that transition as we go forward and providing more feedback and support to companies that work with CDP to really get those transition plans in place, recognized, and to the best quality possible. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, I really hope that the number of companies participating in your program will increase. We know how critical the numbers are, and we know how critical the transparency in these numbers are, and we really value your contribution in this transparency and in these numbers. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Ms. Seray. The same question goes for you. What should Turkey do? As Garanti BBVA, how are you contributing to such activities in Turkey, and what are your future plans? Well, thank you once again. This process that started with the Paris Agreement, of course, the private banks have played a very important role, and we are responsible. We are aware of this responsibility, and green funding activities were very limited, but we started these activities in the beginning of 2000s, and we started by taking into account the green risks, but apart from that, we have seen also there were some climate-related opportunities, and as Garanti BBVA, we have always supported such companies in their green projects, and we actually, for instance, the green loan that was first applied in Turkey through Garanti BBVA, and we had so many developments since then. And for instance, such green projects have reduced loan rates, interest rates. So, and also we are helping them to raise awareness. So up until now, we have supported for more than 60 billion TL in green projects. Apart from that, in BBVA Group has embedded sustainability in its fundamental strategy. And right now, in our portfolio, decarbonization of our portfolio, we've been working on this since 2014. And all of the energy projects that we have been supporting since 2014 are renewable energy projects. In wind power, for instance, in terms of installed power, we are the market leader in terms of the projects we supported. And thanks to our sustainability projects, we actually announced that we will be leaving the coal energy completely until 2024, and we will not be funding any more new projects that are using coal energy. And also, we have taken another important step, and United Nations zero banking commitment is what we have participated in. This is a very important step for us. It's like a roadmap. And in this roadmap, as a bank, we have a transformative power, and we are aware of this power, and we want to use this transformative power in the right places, and we want to take steps for carbon intense projects. And we have entered, we have a methodology or a project called PACT. There are many other international banks. Together with coal, there are 5 other sectors: cement, iron, and steel. And there are 2 other sectors. We're going to now identify goals to exit such sectors completely, and we're going to also help our customers in these sectors to transform their businesses. And we're going to also identify new targets in these sectors. As Ebru also mentioned in her opening speech, apart from our own activities, we are also working to improve the sustainable finance in Turkey. We collaborated with Stock Exchange Istanbul, and we launched Garanti BBVA Climate Index. And since 2015, we've been also reporting to water safety institutions. So we have seen also, we have realized the positive impact that all these initiatives made in our business. So now we have companies who are actually included in this new index in Istanbul Stock Exchange. And our aim is to have a reliable index in water safety, and we would like to also increase the transparency of companies in their role in climate change. And we will continue to come up with different indexes. And this is, we will continue our efforts to improve the sustainable finance market in Turkey. Thank you very much. Hopefully your activities will get stronger year by year, and you're going to contribute to this very important transformation. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Cevdet from the from the industry. We know that TÜSİAD is the largest NGO, and you are a board member in TÜSİAD. And there's something we've been always discussing. We should not wait everything from the government. We know that there are a lot of important things that can be and should be done by the private sector companies as well. So I've seen what do you intend to do in order to increase the number of companies from TÜSİAD attending CDP? Can you maybe make such a decision in the board? Mercy Ararat also mentioned this actually in her speech. In many areas, we stay behind, but we are actually very ahead in terms of the attention that the private sector is giving to this transformation. And I was very proud of this. And individually, I am the board chairman of the 2 companies that were rated A by CDP in Turkey. So I'm proud of this too. So we are really working hard to make sure that more and more companies attend the CDP program in Turkey. We don't definitely expect everything from the government. As the world of TÜSİAD, the world of industry, as it was also said by the CDP, we are actually one of the pioneers in this regard. But of course, there's the other side of the medallion. What should we do from now on? Okay, we've done a lot, but what should we continue? How should we continue in this path? Well, we have to respect science, institutions, and people. And if we take this down or up to the level of sustainability, as you may remember, I concluded my speech by saying that this is not a risk, but an opportunity for us. Although it might sound like a cliche, but looking at how much we adapted to the EU regulations, our experience in EU business world, our digital transformation level, taking into all these things, compared to other countries that we compete with, we are in a very advantageous position. And of course, these are all an opportunity for the companies to actually focus more on sustainability. What can we do more about this? Well, let me name a few milestones. Well, one of them is this Green Action Plan. This is a very important framework, and it has to be actual though, and it has to be relevant. So how are we going to do this 2030 and 2050 carbon neutralization goals? We have to be realistic about this, because I'm sure there are a lot of young people listening to us right now. But of course, in these years, we will be already retired. So in 2030, what will we be doing? We need to be more careful about this. We need to have more science-based targets. And our members are very keen about this, and they're taking very important steps. And I would like to reiterate once again that our roadmap, first of all, should be prepared in a very detailed way for the next 30 years. And also, this digital transformation is also very much related to these targets. So, customs union between European Union and Turkey is another critical point in this subject, because Green Compact and also as Turkey, we need the customs union also to organize, because this will make us closer to one another. Another thing is the Green Action Plan. The EU has a great action plan actually, and our Ministry of Environment is working on another green plan, and they should be definitely related to one another, and there should be some incentive programs that will actually activate this cyclical economy. And we also talked about energy resources, energy management is also a very important part of this transformation. You also mentioned R&D. Of course, in renewable energy, capacity improvement, research and development, and formation of new technologies, green hydrogen, decarbonization processes, green certificates, carbon capturing and storage technologies. I mean, all these are very critical topics, and they should be regarded as a 360 view. And there should be a fair transformation plan that should be put into place by the Turkish government that is taking into account all these different elements, and also energy efficiency policies should be developed and put into place. There's another topic about energy. I would like to emphasize this one. Production close to consumption. This is very important. This will definitely help the energy efficiency problems as well. And also resource and reserve planning is another important theme that we need to develop and improve. Long-term sustainable green policy is what we need as Turkey. And looking at our relations with the EU, the carbon footprint should be tracked throughout the value chain. And here, we need to have digital processes for the infrastructure of these digital processes, and our GDPR, the data protection law, and all the other subtitles regarding this should be in harmony with the EU's GDPR, because this will definitely support exporting to EU, the new products exporting to EU. Mr. Carpenter also mentioned this. SMEs have always been a very important element in the Turkish economy. They're green, they should be also participating in the green revolution. So looking at the key things, customs union, updating of the customs union, digital and green passports to transit to green economy, renewable energy, green hydrogen, storage systems, and high technology and R&D that will support this should be incentivized. And the updating of GDPR and green certificates in energy efficiency. These are the important themes that I would like to underline once again. As I said before, we have to respect science, the institutions, and the people. So science, technology, I mean, they should be respecting, we have to support incentives, the grants, in order to respect people, and we have to also support new technologies and R&D. Thank you very much. I know that TÜSİAD has been working a lot on these topics, and I surely hope that you will continue your tremendous efforts. I would like to thank all of you once again. As it was the title of the panel, there are a lot of uncertainties. I mean, it's easy to put targets saying that let's do this for 2030, let's do that for 2050. But of course, we have to do whatever it takes to achieve these targets. We have a huge homework. Hopefully, we're going to do whatever we can. Maybe we're not going to reach these targets 100%, but we will get as close as possible. Thank you very much once again, and hope to see you all again.